Ethan Cole slammed his fist against the oak door so hard the wood shuddered. "Open up. Please, anybody, I've got a kid waiting for me at home and a dead engine in your driveway." Snow tore sideways across his face. His knuckles were bleeding. And when the door finally cracked open, the last woman on earth he wanted to see was standing there in a silk robe, Victoria Hale, the ice-cold CEO, who signed his paychecks and had never once said his name. She looked at him like he was a stain on her marble floor. What neither of them knew was that by sunrise they'd be lying in the same bed and she'd be the one moving closer. Before we go on, do me a favor, drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments below. I want to see how far this story is reaching tonight. And if you like stories about ordinary men who find something extraordinary when everything falls apart, hit that subscribe button and stay with me all the way to the end. Trust me, what happens at 4 a.m. will surprise you. Now, let's begin. Ethan Cole had always been the kind of man who fixed things. Broken furnaces, busted wiring, cracked water heaters at 2 in the morning when somebody's basement was flooding. For 17 years, that was his life. A toolbox in one hand, a flashlight in the other, and a quiet pride in being the guy who showed up when everything went wrong. But sitting in his stalled pickup truck on a mountain road with the temperature dropping like a stone and the snow coming down so thick he couldn't see 10 feet past his own headlights, Ethan Cole couldn't fix a single thing. "Come on," he muttered, turning the key again. "Come on, you piece of junk, not now." The engine groaned, then nothing. He smacked the steering wheel with the heel of his hand. Not tonight. He grabbed his phone off the passenger seat and held it up. 1 bar, then no bars, then a little gray message that made his stomach drop, no service. No, 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 no. Because the truth was, Ethan didn't care about himself right now. He cared about a 7-year-old girl named Lily, sitting in a small house 2 hours down the mountain, probably already asking the babysitter when Daddy was coming home. He'd promised her he'd be back by 8 to read her the next chapter of the dinosaur book. They were on the part where the little triceratops get separated from the herd. He looked at the dashboard clock. 6:47 p.m. He wasn't going to make it. Ethan pressed his forehead against the cold steering wheel and let out a long, shaking breath. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered to no one. "Daddy's gonna be late." When he lifted his head, the snow had somehow gotten worse. The whole world outside had turned into a white wall swallowing the trees, the road, everything. And the cold was already creeping into the cab, finding its way through the gaps in the doors, settling into his fingers. He knew what happened to men who stayed in stalled cars in storms like this. He'd seen the news stories. He'd been the guy who got called afterward to fix the heating in houses where it had been too late for somebody. He had a choice: freeze in the truck or walk. About a mile back, he'd passed a turnoff, a private road. He remembered it because of the sign, polished expensive, lit up even in the storm, Hale Ridge Private Residence. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew that name. Everybody who worked for Hale Industries knew that name. Victoria Hale owned half the resorts in 3 states. She owned the building he worked in. She owned the very mountain he was stranded on. And she was by every account he'd ever heard the coldest, hardest, most untouchable woman in the entire company. He'd seen her exactly twice, once in an elevator where she'd stared straight ahead and never acknowledged he existed, and once at a company event where she'd given a speech about efficiency and expectations and then left before anybody could finish their drinks. The men in the maintenance crew had a name for her: the Glacier. Ethan zipped his jacket up to his throat. "Of course," he said to the empty truck. "Of course it's her house." He grabbed his flashlight, shoved his dead phone in his pocket, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a slap. The wind screamed down off the ridge, and the snow stung his face like needles. He pulled his collar up and started walking head down one boot in front of the other, his flashlight beam disappearing into the white. It took him almost 40 minutes to walk that mile. 40 minutes of wind that tried to knock him off his feet of snow, that filled his boots of fingers that went from cold to numb, to something past numb that scared him. By the time he saw the lights of the house through the trees, He couldn't feel his face. The house was huge, a mountain mansion of glass and stone and timber glowing warm and gold against the storm. Smoke curled from a chimney. Somewhere in there, Ethan thought there was heat. There was a phone. There was a way home to Lily. He stumbled up the steps and pounded on the door. Nothing. He pounded again harder until his knuckles split. "Open up! Please, anybody? I've got a kid waiting for me at home and a dead engine in your driveway." For a long moment there was nothing but the howl of the wind. Then the door opened. And there she was. Victoria Hale stood in the doorway in a gray silk robe, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face set in an expression Ethan recognized from that elevator. The look that said, "You don't matter to me and you never will." In the warm light spilling out behind her, she looked exactly like she did in the company photos. Sharp, beautiful, untouchable. Her eyes swept over him, the snow caked on his shoulders, the blood on his hand, the maintenance company logo on his jacket. "You," she said flatly, "are not supposed to be here." Ethan was shaking too hard to be intimidated. "Ms. Hale, I'm Ethan Cole. I work for—" "I know where you work." Her voice was cold as the storm behind him. "What I don't know is why you're standing on my doorstep at 7 o'clock at night. My truck died, about a mile back. Phone's got no signal." The words came out in clouds of steam. "I wasn't going to make it in the truck, ma'am. I'm sorry. I didn't have anywhere else to go." Victoria's eyes narrowed. For a moment, she just looked at him, and Ethan had the strange feeling she was calculating something weighing him the way she probably weighed everything. A risk, a problem to be managed. "You can use the phone," she said finally. "Make your call, then you can wait in the entryway until the storm lets up." She didn't invite him in so much as step aside the bare minimum required to let a freezing man not die on her porch. Ethan stepped over the threshold and nearly groaned at the warmth. His whole body started shaking harder as the heat hit his frozen skin. "Thank you," he managed. "Thank you, ma'am. I just need to call my daughter's sitter and let her know. The phone is on the wall." She pointed without looking at him. "Be quick." He crossed to the phone, his numb fingers fumbling the receiver. He dialed the babysitter's number from memory and pressed it to his ear. Dead. No dial tone. Nothing. He clicked the cradle a few times. "It's the line's dead." Victoria's expression flickered just slightly. She walked to the window and looked out at the storm. "The lines must be down. It happens up here." She crossed her arms. "How bad is the road?" "Bad," Ethan said. "Real bad. I couldn't see the road half the time walking up. There's no way down tonight. Not for anybody." For the first time, something other than ice crossed Victoria Hale's face. Just a flash. Then it was gone, buried again under that perfect, controlled mask. "I see," she said. They stood there in silence, two strangers in a glowing house, while the storm raged outside. And Ethan, exhausted and frozen and worried sick about his little girl, finally let himself really look at the most powerful woman in his company. She wasn't as composed as she wanted to seem. He could see it now, the way her hand gripped her own elbow a little too tightly, the faint shadows under her eyes. The fact that this enormous house, this palace on the mountain, was completely empty except for her. No staff, no husband, no family. Just Victoria Hale alone on the highest peak she owned on the coldest night of the year. "You're staring," she said without turning around. "Sorry. Don't apologize. Just stop." She finally turned to face him. "Here are the rules, Mr. Cole. You're stranded, and I'm not a monster, whatever your maintenance friends might say about me in the break room." Ethan opened his mouth to deny it. "Don't bother," she said. "I know what they call me." He shut his mouth. "You'll stay until the road clears. There's a generator, so we'll have power as long as the propane lasts. You will not touch anything that isn't offered to you. You will not ask me questions about myself. And in the morning, when help arrives, we will both pretend this night never happened. Are we clear?" It was the longest speech she'd ever given him, and every word of it was a wall. "Crystal," Ethan said. "Good." She pulled her robe tighter. "There's a bathroom down the hall. Get yourself dry before you catch pneumonia. I have enough problems without explaining a dead contractor to my legal department. Despite everything, despite the cold, and the worry, and the strangeness of it all, Ethan felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Always thinking about liability, huh? Victoria's eyes snapped to his. For a second, he thought he'd crossed a line. Then to his complete surprise, something shifted in her face. Not a smile. Nothing as warm as that. But something. Someone has to, she said. He went and dried off. When he came back wearing a towel around his shoulders and his shirt drying near the fire she'd let him hang it by, he found her sitting on the edge of an enormous leather sofa, staring into the flames with a glass of wine. She wasn't drinking. He sat down on the opposite end, as far away as the couch allowed. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. The wind threw itself against the windows. The storm got worse. "You have a daughter," Victoria said suddenly. It wasn't a question, and it broke her own rule about not asking him things, but Ethan didn't point that out. "Lily," he said. "She's 7. I was supposed to be home to read to her tonight." He stared at the fire. "She's gonna think I forgot. Where's her mother?" The question hung in the air. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Gone," he said. 3 years now. Took off when Lily was 4. Decided being a mom wasn't the life she wanted. He turned his wedding ring finger over bare, just a faint pale line where a ring used to be. "So it's just us, me and Lily. I work the jobs nobody else wants because they pay overtime, and I get home as fast as I can, and most nights I make it for the bedtime story." His voice cracked just slightly. "Tonight I didn't." Victoria was quiet. When Ethan glanced over, she wasn't looking at him with that cold, calculating stare anymore. She was looking at him like she actually saw him. "You'll make it tomorrow," she said. "Yeah." He wiped his face with the towel. "Yeah, I'll make it tomorrow." Outside, the wind let out a sound like something dying, and the lights flickered. Victoria stood up fast. "The generator." "I can take a look at it," Ethan said, already on his feet. "That's literally my job, ma'am." She hesitated, and Ethan understood in that moment exactly how hard it was for Victoria Hale to ever in her entire life accept help from anyone. "Fine," she said tightly. "It's in the utility room, off the kitchen." He followed her through the dark, enormous house, his bare feet cold on the floor, until they reached the utility room. He crouched down by the generator, ran his flashlight over it, and within 30 seconds, he'd found the problem. "Fuel line's half frozen," he said, "and your filter's clogged. Whoever services this thing did a lousy job. When'd you last have it checked?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted. "I have people for that." "Well, your people stink." He started working, his hands moving with the easy confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "Hold the light for me." And there it was, the most powerful CEO in 3 states, crouched on a utility room floor in her silk robe, holding a flashlight for a maintenance man. If anyone in the company could have seen it, they wouldn't have believed it. "There," Ethan said after a few minutes. "That should hold. But I'm not going to lie to you, ma'am. This generator's running on borrowed time and the propane's lower than it should be. The heat in this place is going to start dropping no matter what I do. We need to think about staying warm." Victoria stood brushing off her robe. "There are blankets, firewood. We'll be fine." "Be-bow." In a house this size, with glass walls and no insulation worth a damn? Ethan shook his head. "Ma'am, I've seen people get hypothermia inside their own homes. The cold's coming whether we like it or not. We just gotta be smart about it." For the first time, he saw something in Victoria Hale's eyes that he'd never expected to see there. Fear. Not for her business, not for her reputation. Just the plain human fear of being cold and alone in the dark. She covered it quickly. "Then we'll be smart about it," she said. They went back to the living room. Ethan built the fire up bigger. Victoria found extra blankets. They sat back down on opposite ends of the couch, the storm howling, the temperature already dropping as the heat began to fail. And in the firelight, the walls between them got just a little bit thinner. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "You agreed not to." "Yeah, well, you broke your own rule first." A pause. Then, almost reluctantly, ask. Why are you up here alone on a night like this? You've got the whole world, Ms. Hale. You could be anywhere, with anybody. Why here? Victoria stared into the fire for a long, long time. Ethan figured she wasn't going to answer. Then she said very quietly, "Because there's no one to be with." Ethan didn't say anything. He just let the words sit there. "I built all of this," she went on, her voice barely above the crackle of the flames. "Every building, every resort, every dollar. I worked harder than any man in that company, and I earned every inch of it. And do you know what I have to show for it, Mr. Cole?" She gestured at the vast, empty, beautiful house around them. "This, an empty house on an empty mountain. I come up here every year on this same week to be alone, because it's the only place where I don't have to pretend I have anyone to come home to." Ethan looked at her. Really looked. And he didn't see the glacier anymore. He didn't see the CEO who signed his checks. He saw a person. A tired, lonely, frightened person sitting in the dark on the coldest night of the year. "You know," he said softly, "I think that's the most honest thing anyone in that company's ever said to me." Victoria let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "It's the storm. People say things in storms they'd never say in daylight." "Maybe," Ethan said. "Or maybe you just needed somebody to say it to." She turned and looked at him, and for one long moment the two of them just held each other's gaze across the firelit room. The single dad who fixed broken things, and the lonely woman who had everything except the one thing money couldn't buy. Then the lights flickered again, and the generator coughed, and the cold pressed in harder. "It's getting colder," Victoria said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "It is." The fire popped, the wind screamed, and somewhere down the mountain, a little girl named Lily fell asleep, waiting for a story that wasn't coming tonight, not knowing that her daddy, stranded in a storm at the top of the world, was about to face the longest, strangest, most life-changing night of his entire life. The temperature kept dropping, and the two strangers sat in the dark on opposite ends of a couch, both of them wide awake, and both of them for the first time in years, not entirely alone. The first thing that broke the silence was the sound of the heat dying. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a soft click somewhere deep in the walls, and then the low hum that Ethan hadn't even noticed was there simply stopped. The house went quiet in a way that made the back of his neck tingle. "That's the furnace," he said, already on his feet. "That's the main heat shutting down." Victoria stood too. "You said you fixed it." "I fixed the generator. The furnace runs off the propane, and I told you the propane's low." He grabbed his flashlight off the side table. "Where's the tank?" "Outside. East side of the house." She wrapped her arms around herself. "You can't go out there. You saw what it's doing." "I have to look at the gauge." He was already moving toward the door. "If I don't know how much we've got left, I can't tell you how long we stay warm." "Mr. Cole." Her voice cut across the room sharp as broken glass. "If you walk out that door and freeze in my yard, you don't help your daughter and you don't help me. Sit down." He stopped with his hand on the doorknob. It was 8:52 p.m. He turned around slowly. "You're scared." "I'm being practical." "No." He let go of the door. "You said it yourself in the utility room. I saw your face. You're scared, Ms. Hale, and that's okay. You're allowed to be scared. But me sitting on that couch being scared with you doesn't keep us warm." She didn't answer. She just stared at him, and in the dim light from the fire, he could see her jaw working like she was chewing on something she didn't want to swallow. 20 feet, he said. "I'll go 20 feet, check the gauge, and come right back. I promise you. I've got a kid to get home to. I'm not going to do anything stupid." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she crossed the room, pulled a heavy wool coat off a hook by the door, and shoved it against his chest. "It was my father's," she said. "It's warmer than anything you've got. And you have 90 seconds. If you're not back in 90 seconds, I'm coming out after you, and then we'll both be idiots freezing in the snow." Ethan took the coat. Something in his chest pulled tight at the way she said it. "You'd come after me. Don't read into it. Wouldn't dream of it." He pulled the coat on. It smelled like cedar and old money, and something faintly like cigar smoke, a ghost of a man who'd been dead a long time. He yanked the door open, and the storm reached in and grabbed him. The next 90 seconds were the longest of the night so far. The wind nearly took him off his feet the second he stepped off the porch. The snow had drifted up to his knees on the east side, and the cold went through his borrowed coat and his still damp shirt and straight into his bones. He found the propane tank by feel, as much as sight scraped the ice off the gauge with his thumbnail, and shined the flashlight on it. The needle sat just above the red. His stomach dropped. He fought his way back to the porch, and the door flew open before he even reached it. Victoria standing there, her hand already extended like she'd been about to make good on her threat. He fell through the doorway, and she slammed it shut behind him, and for 1 second they were just two people standing very close together in the dark, both of them breathing hard. "Well," she said. He pulled the coat off his hands, shaking. "We've got maybe 6 hours, 8 if we're careful. After that, the furnace is done and we're running on the fireplace and body heat and nothing else." It was 8:56 p.m. Victoria's face went very still. 6 hours. 6, maybe 8, and it's going to be a long way till morning. She turned away from him and walked to the window, staring out at the storm she couldn't even see anymore. "This is absurd," she said almost to herself. "I have a satellite phone in the safe. I have a backup generator scheduled for installation in the spring. I have contingency plans for everything." A bitter laugh. "Everything except being trapped on my own mountain with a maintenance man and a tank of propane running on fumes. Satellite phone." Ethan's head snapped up. "You've got a satellite phone?" She went rigid. "Ms. Hale." He crossed the room. "You've got a satellite phone in a safe, and you've had it this whole time and you didn't say anything? It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. I could call my daughter. I could call for help. I could—" He stopped. Something in her face stopped him cold. "Why didn't you tell me?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because the battery's dead," she said finally. "I keep it in the safe, and I never charge it because I never come up here expecting to need it. I come up here to be unreachable. That's the entire point." She turned to face him, and there was something raw and ashamed in her expression. "I have a satellite phone with a dead battery and no charger because the 1 week a year I allow myself to disappear, I make absolutely certain that no one can find me." The words hung there. It was 8:59 p.m. "My God," Ethan said softly. "You really did build a fortress, didn't you?" "I built a life." "You built a cage." He didn't say it cruelly. He said it like a man who recognized one when he saw it. "I've been in one too. Different bars. But a cage is a cage." She looked at him sharply like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. "There's a car charger," she said instead. "In the glove box of the truck I keep in the garage, the Range Rover. If I can find a way to run it off the generator or even off the truck's battery, I might be able to get enough charge into the phone to make one call." Ethan was already moving. "Show me the garage." What followed was 40 minutes that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life, not because of what they did, but because of how they did it. Two people who 12 hours ago wouldn't have shared an elevator working side by side in a freezing garage by flashlight, trying to coax a dead phone back to life. He pulled the truck battery's terminals while she held the light. She found the charger and the adapter while he figured out the connections. They snapped at each other twice and apologized once, and somewhere in the middle of it, without either of them noticing, they stopped being strangers and started being something closer to a team. "There," Ethan said at last, watching the tiny screen on the satellite phone flicker to life. "It's charging. Slow as molasses, but it's charging." Victoria let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. "How long until it can make a call?" "An hour. Maybe more." He set the phone carefully on the workbench. "But it's something. It's a way out." She nodded, and then very quietly she said, "You should call your daughter first, when it's ready." Ethan looked at her. "It's your phone. You have someone waiting for you." She said it simply, but there was a whole world of loneliness packed into those 5 words. "I don't. Call your daughter." It was 9:43 p.m. Something moved in Ethan's chest, some warmth that had nothing to do with the dying furnace. "Thank you," he said. "I mean it. Thank you. Don't make it a thing. Wouldn't dream of it." They went back to the living room. The fire had burned down, so Ethan built it up again, and Victoria found more blankets, and they settled back onto opposite ends of the couch to wait for the phone to charge. But something had shifted. The silence between them wasn't gridlocked and hostile anymore. It was just quiet. The quiet of two people who'd been through something small together and come out the other side. "Tell me about her," Victoria said. "Who?" "Your daughter, Lily." She pulled a blanket over her legs. "If I have to sit here freezing for the next hour, I'd rather hear about something other than how cold I am." So Ethan told her about Lily. He told her about the gap in her front teeth and the way she insisted on wearing rain boots even when it was sunny. He told her about the dinosaur book and the bedtime ritual and how she always made him do the Triceratops voice. He told her about the bad days, the day her mother left, the nights Lily woke up crying and asking when Mommy was coming back, the slow, brutal work of explaining to a 4-year-old that some questions don't have answers. And Victoria, the woman who had built an empire on never showing weakness, listened. Really listened. And at some point Ethan realized she'd inched a few inches closer down the couch without seeming to know she'd done it. "You love her very much," she said when he finished. "She's the only thing I ever got completely right." He stared into the fire. "Everything else in my life is half finished or broken or gone. But that kid I did right." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I never wanted children," she said. "Everyone always assumed there was some tragedy behind it. Some great heartbreak. There wasn't. I looked at the math, the hours, the cost, the way the world treats women who try to have both. And I decided I'd rather have one thing and have it completely than two things and have them both badly." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I was very proud of that decision for a long time. And now?" She didn't answer right away. It was 10:17 p.m. "Now," she said finally. "I'm sitting in an empty house on a mountain in a storm, and the only person in the world who knows where I am is a man who came here by accident. So," a thin, brittle smile. "Make of that what you will." Ethan didn't say anything clever. He didn't try to fix it. He just nodded slowly because he understood. And because some things don't get fixed, they just get witnessed. "For what it's worth," he said, "you don't strike me as somebody who got it wrong. You strike me as somebody who got told a long time ago that you only got to pick one. And maybe that was never true." Victoria looked at him for a long, strange moment. And then the phone on the workbench in the garage was forgotten because the lights went out. Not flickered. Out. The whole house plunged into darkness so complete that for a second, Ethan couldn't tell if his eyes were open. "Ethan." Victoria's voice came out of the black, and it was the first time she'd ever used his first name. "The generator." He was already up, flashlight in hand. "Stay here. I'm coming with you." "Victoria." "It's my house. I'm coming." It was 10:31 p.m. They made their way through the freezing dark to the utility room, and the second Ethan got the flashlight on the generator he knew. He didn't even have to touch it. The thing had stopped dead, and there was a smell in the air, sharp chemical wrong. "It seized," he said. "The fuel line froze solid this time. Whole thing's locked up." He crouched down, ran his hands over it, confirmed what he already knew. "I can't fix this tonight. Not without parts. Not without heat to thaw it. It's done." The words landed in the dark like stones. "What does that mean?" Victoria said. It wasn't a question. "It means no generator, no backup power. The furnace was already dying, and now there's nothing pushing the propane through." He stood up slowly. "It means the only heat in this house in about an hour is gonna be that fireplace. And one fireplace can't heat a house this size, not even close." Silence. "How cold?" she said. "Cold enough to matter. Cold enough that we need to be careful." He turned the flashlight toward her, careful to keep it off her face. "Ms. Hale, Victoria, I need you to listen to me now, because this is the part of my job I actually know. People don't freeze to death because it gets cold. They freeze because they make bad decisions when it gets cold. They spread out. They stay still. They try to tough it out alone in separate rooms. He paused. We're not going to do that. Whatever happens tonight, we stay together, we stay near the fire, and we share heat. That's not me being anything other than a guy trying to keep us both alive. Do you understand me? It was 10:48 p.m. He watched the war happen on her face. Watched the CEO who'd spent 30 years building walls go head to head with the woman who just wanted to survive the night. I understand, she said quietly. They went back to the living room, and the temperature was already dropping. Ethan stacked every piece of firewood Victoria had built the fire as big as the hearth would safely hold, and dragged the couch as close to it as he dared. Victoria brought every blanket in the house, a mountain of wool and down and cashmere that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. And then there was the phone. I forgot the phone, Ethan said suddenly. It's still charging in the garage, off the truck battery, which still has charge. Victoria looked at him. Go check it. He went. He came back 2 minutes later, and his face told the story before he opened his mouth. The cold killed the charging, he said. It got enough juice to power on, but the second I tried to make a call, it died. The battery won't hold a charge in this temperature. He set the dead phone on the table. It needs to warm up. We need to keep it warm next to the fire next to us all night, and maybe by morning it'll hold enough charge to make one call. It was 11:04 p.m. Victoria stared at the dead phone. So that's it. Our one way out, and it needs to spend the night being babysat by a fire like everything else. Like everything else, Ethan agreed. She let out a long breath, and something in her seemed to finally let go. The last bit of pretense. The last inch of distance. She sank down onto the couch, pulled a blanket around her shoulders, and for the first time all night, she looked completely, utterly human. I'm cold, she said. It was almost a confession. I know. Ethan sat down beside her, not at the far end this time, but close enough that the blankets overlapped. Come here. She stiffened. Mr. Cole, body heat Victoria, that's all. 2 people under blankets stay warmer than 2 people 3 feet apart. It's physics. It's the same reason penguins huddle. He kept his voice easy, gentle, the voice he used with Lily when she had a bad dream. I'm not going to do anything but sit here and be warm and keep you warm. You've got my word. And whatever else you think about me, you've watched me all night. You know I keep my word. For a long moment, she didn't move. It was 11:11 p.m. And then slowly, like a building coming down one floor at a time. Victoria Hale leaned in. She tucked herself against his side, stiff and careful, holding herself like she expected to bolt at any second. Ethan put one arm around her over the blankets and pulled the wool tighter around them both. She was shivering. You really are cold, he said. I told you I was cold. I didn't believe you. You're not exactly a woman who admits things. He felt her almost laugh against his shoulder. No, she said. I'm not. They sat there in the firelight, 2 strangers wrapped in blankets, and slowly, the shivering stopped. Slowly, the stiffness went out of her. Slowly, the most powerful woman Ethan Cole had ever met let herself rest just a little against the shoulder of a man who fixed broken things for a living. Can I tell you something? She said after a while. Her voice was small in the dark. Yeah, I haven't been this close to another person in 4 years. Ethan didn't say anything. He just tightened his arm a fraction. Not like this, she went on. Not the way you mean. I have people around me constantly, meetings, dinners, men who want things from me, but this, she stopped. Someone just being next to me, someone not wanting anything. I can't remember the last time. That's a sad way to live, Victoria. It's a successful way to live. They're not the same thing. She was quiet. He felt her breathing slow deepen. It was 11:38 p.m. Tell me about your wife, she said. The one who left. Tell me what happened. So he did. And it cost him something because Ethan Cole didn't talk about Sarah not to anybody not in 3 years. But there in the dark with the storm howling and the fire crackling and this strange lonely woman tucked against his side, the words came out of him like they'd been waiting. He told her about meeting Sarah at 22, about the wedding they couldn't afford, about the early years broke and happy, about how the broke part outlasted the happy part, about the slow way she'd started looking at their small life like it was a prison, the way she'd started talking about all the things she could have been if she hadn't gotten tied down. About Lily's birth, which he'd thought would fix everything, and instead seemed to make Sarah feel even more trapped. And then about the morning he'd woken up and found the note, about reading it 3 times before it made sense, about Lily standing in the kitchen doorway in her dinosaur pajamas asking where Mommy went. "I told her Mommy had to go on a long trip," Ethan said, and his voice was rough. "She was 4. What else do you tell a 4-year-old? And every birthday since then, every Christmas Lily makes a wish, and I know she's wishing her mom comes back. And I just have to stand there and watch her wish for something that's never gonna happen." Victoria had gone very still against him. "That's the thing nobody tells you about being a single father," he said. "It's not the money, even though the money's brutal. It's not the exhaustion, even though I haven't slept right in 3 years. It's the wishes. It's watching your kid wish for something you can't give her. That's the part that breaks you." It was 11:56 p.m. For a long time, Victoria didn't speak. Then she said, "You're a good man, Ethan Cole." "I'm a tired man." "You can be both." He let out a breath that was half a laugh and half something else. "Yeah, I guess you can." The fire popped. The storm threw itself against the windows. And the two of them sat there as midnight came and went, wrapped in blankets, sharing the only warmth left in a freezing house at the top of the world. It was just past midnight when Victoria spoke again, and this time her voice was different, tighter, like she was forcing herself to say something she didn't want to. "The couch isn't going to work." Ethan looked down at her. "What?" "The fire's dying down again, and you said yourself one fireplace can't heat this room." She pulled back from him slightly so she could look at his face. "I've been sitting here doing the math, the way you do the math, and the couch isn't going to keep us warm enough through the worst of it. The temperature drops most between 3 and 5. We both know it, and if we sit out here, we're going to spend that window in a freezing living room with a fire we can't keep fed." "What are you saying?" She took a breath. It was 12:14 a.m. "My bedroom is the smallest room in the house," she said. "It has the only working secondary heat source, an electric baseboard unit that runs off the wall and the walls on its own circuit that might still have power even with the generator down. It has thick curtains. It's insulated. It will hold heat 10 times better than this room." She said it all very fast, very clinical, like a woman presenting a quarterly report. "There's one bed, a large one, and the only smart thing is for both of us to be in that room with that heat under those blankets until morning." The words sat there in the firelight. Ethan understood exactly what she was offering and exactly how much it cost her to offer it. This wasn't a come-on. It was the opposite. It was Victoria Hale who had spent 30 years making sure no one ever got close enough to hurt her, looking at a maintenance man she'd met 6 hours ago, and saying, "I need your help to survive the night, and I'm willing to be vulnerable to do it." "Victoria," he said carefully, "I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. I'm asking you to share a bed with me so that neither of us gets hypothermia, and then I'm asking you to never ever speak of it again." Her chin came up, and there was the CEO again armor back in place, even as she made herself defenseless. "I'm asking you to be a professional, and a gentleman, and a sensible adult. Can you do that?" It was 12:19 a.m. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I can do that." "Good. On one condition." Her eyes narrowed. "You're negotiating. You stop calling me Mr. Cole." He almost smiled. "If we're going to survive the night together, you can call me Ethan." Something flickered across her face. Something that on anyone else he might have called relief. "Fine," she said. "Ethan." Victoria, don't make it weird. You keep saying that, and yet. They gathered everything they'd need. Ethan banked the fire so it wouldn't go out. He wrapped the dead satellite phone in a dish towel and carried it like it was made of glass because it was their one way out, and it needed to stay as warm as they did. Victoria led the way down the dark hall with the flashlight, and Ethan followed, and neither of them said a word because there were no words for the strangeness of what they were doing. The bedroom was smaller like she'd said. Warmer, too. The baseboard heater along the wall was putting out a faint, blessed warmth, the only working heat left in the entire house. Victoria set the flashlight on the nightstand, pointed at the ceiling so the room glowed dim and gold. The bed was enormous, and there was only one of it. "I'll take that side," Ethan said, pointing to the far edge. "You take that one. There's enough room between us to land a plane." "There's enough room between us to land 2 planes," Victoria said, "and we'll both freeze if we use all of it. But yes, we start on the edges." It was 12:34 a.m. They climbed in fully clothed on opposite edges of the vast bed, a canyon of cold sheets between them. Victoria pulled the duvet up to her chin. Ethan lay flat on his back, staring at the ceiling, hands folded on his chest, like a man in a coffin, every muscle tense with the effort of taking up as little space as possible. For a long time, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The storm raged on outside, but in the small warm room, it was almost quiet, just the faint tick of the baseboard heater and the sound of 2 people breathing very carefully. "Ethan," Victoria said into the dark. "Yeah. Thank you. For today. For all of it. The generator and the propane and the—" A pause. "For not making me feel like a fool for being scared." "You're not a fool, Victoria." I felt like one. Standing in that doorway looking out at the storm, realizing for the first time in my life that I'd built something I couldn't control. Her voice was soft, almost dreamy. The voice of someone right on the edge of sleep. I've controlled everything for 30 years. And it took one storm and one stranger to show me how little of it was ever really mine. Ethan turned his head on the pillow toward her voice in the dark. "It was never about control," he said. "It was about not getting hurt. I know because I did the same thing. Built my whole life around Lily, so I'd never have to risk anything again. Told myself it was for her. Half of it was for me. So I'd never have to wake up to another note on the kitchen table." He paused. "We're not so different, you and me. We just bought different cages." It was 12:51 a.m. Victoria didn't answer for a long time, and then very quietly, in a voice he almost didn't hear, she said, "I don't want to be in a cage anymore." The words went through Ethan like a current. He didn't say anything. He didn't dare. He just lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe, feeling the canyon of cold sheets between them, and understanding that something enormous had just been said in that small warm room, something that couldn't be unsaid, no matter what they pretended in the morning. The minutes ticked by. The room held its warmth. And slowly the careful tension between them began to ease into the looser rhythm of 2 exhausted people drifting toward sleep. It was 1 a.m. when Ethan felt the bed shift. It was small. Almost nothing. Just the faintest movement of the mattress as Victoria, somewhere in the gray space between waking and sleeping, turned in her sleep, turned toward the warmth toward him, the way a flower turns toward the sun without ever knowing it's doing it. He went very still. She'd moved maybe 6 inches. The canyon between them had become a valley, and in the dim gold light he could see her face now slack and peaceful in sleep. All the armor gone, all the sharp edges softened. The glacier melting 1 degree at a time. He didn't move toward her. He wouldn't. He'd given his word, and Ethan Cole's word was the one thing in his life that had never once broken. But he didn't move away either. He just lay there and let her be close, let her chase the warmth in her sleep, and he thought about how strange life was, how a dead engine and a snowstorm and a tank of propane running on fumes had brought him here to this bed, to this woman on the strangest night of his entire life. It was 1:23 a.m. The storm pressed on outside. The fire down the hall burned low. The dead phone sat wrapped in its dish towel, warming slowly, holding their one fragile hope of rescue. And in the small warm room at the top of the mountain, Victoria Hale shifted again in her sleep. Another few inches across the bed, closer to the only warmth left in her world, closer to the man who fixed broken things, who'd promised not to move, and who lay awake in the dark, keeping that promise with everything he had, even as the woman beside him kept hour by hour inching closer. At 1:47 a.m., the dead phone made a sound. It was small, a single soft chime in the dark, barely louder than the tick of the baseboard heater, but Ethan Cole heard it the way a parent hears their child cough in another room. He came fully awake in an instant, his heart slamming, and for a second he couldn't figure out where the sound had come from. Then he remembered. The phone, wrapped in its dish towel on the nightstand, warming by the inch all night long. He moved carefully so he wouldn't wake the woman now curled against his shoulder, reached over, and unwrapped the towel. The satellite phone's screen glowed faintly in the dark. 1 bar of battery. A single, fragile, flickering bar. Victoria. He kept his voice low. Victoria, wake up. She stirred against him, and then she went rigid as she realized where she was. How close she'd drifted. How her cheek was against his shoulder. How her hand had ended up resting on his chest sometime in the last hour. She pulled back fast, and the cold rushed into the space between them. What is it? The phone. He held it up. It charged. Just barely. It's got maybe 1 call in it before the cold kills it again. That woke her all the way up. She sat up, pushing her hair out of her face, and even in the dark, he could feel the way her whole body changed, the executive snapping back into place, the woman who solved problems for a living. 1 call, she said. We have to make it count. Emergency services. Give them the coordinates. I know the GPS coordinates of this property by heart. Victoria. Ethan's throat was tight. You said I could call Lily. She went still. It was 1:51 a.m. He watched the war happen on her face in the dim glow of the phone. He knew exactly what he was asking. 1 call. 1 call could mean rescue a helicopter, a snowcat, someone coming up the mountain at first light to get them out. Or it could mean a 7-year-old girl hearing her daddy's voice and knowing he was alive. He knew which one was the smart call. He knew which one a sensible man made. Make the call to your daughter, Victoria said quietly. Ethan blinked. What? You heard me. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Call Lily. Victoria, that's if we don't call for help, nobody knows we're up here. Your own rule. You disappear up here on purpose. Nobody's coming looking for either of us until someone notices the most powerful woman in 3 states missed a Monday morning board meeting, she said. Which they will. Believe me, Ethan, the moment I don't show up to a meeting, an entire machine starts looking for me. I'm not a man who can vanish for a weekend. I'm an institution. They'll come. She nodded at the phone. But your daughter doesn't have an institution. She has you. And right now she has a note that her babysitter probably left, or worse, she's lying awake thinking the same thing you're afraid she's thinking. So call her. Tell her you're alive. The rescue will sort itself out. Ethan stared at her in the dark, and something cracked open in his chest. You'd do that, he said. You'd give up your 1 call to let me talk to my kid. Don't make it a thing. It's a thing, Victoria. It's a hell of a thing. Then make the call before I change my mind because the battery's dropping. His hands were shaking as he dialed. Not from the cold this time. He dialed the babysitter's cell, the only number he could think of that might be awake at 2 in the morning, and he pressed the phone to his ear and it rang. It rang twice. It was 1:54 a.m. Hello. The babysitter's voice fuzzy and frightened. Hello. Who is this? Marcy, it's Ethan. It's Ethan. Don't hang up. I've only got a second. Ethan? Oh my God. Ethan, where are you? The roads are all closed. The news is saying people are stranded. I've been so scared. Lily's been... Marcy, listen to me. I'm okay. I'm stranded up the mountain, but I'm safe and warm and I'm gonna get home. You hear me? Is Lily awake? Can you wake her up? Can I? She's right here. She wouldn't go to bed. She's been sitting by the window. And then there was a shuffle, and a small voice thick with sleep and tears, and it said, "Daddy." Ethan Cole, who hadn't cried in 3 years, who hadn't let himself cry since the morning he found the note, felt his whole face come apart. "Hey, baby," he managed. "Hey, Lilybug, it's Daddy." "Daddy, where are you? You didn't come home. You said you'd read me the Triceratops part." "I know, baby. I know I did, and I'm so sorry. Daddy's truck broke down in the snow way up on the mountain. But I'm safe. Okay, I'm in a warm house, and I've got a nice lady helping me, and as soon as the snow stops, I'm gonna come right home and read you the whole rest of the book. I promise. I pinky promise." "You can't pinky promise on the phone." He laughed, and it came out wet. "You're right. You're right, I can't. So I'm gonna double pinky promise it when I get home. 2 pinkies. Deal. Deal." A pause. "Daddy? Yeah, baby? Are you scared?" It was 1:57 a.m. The battery bar was flashing now. Red. And Ethan looked across the dark bed at Victoria Hale, who was watching him with an expression he'd never seen on her before, soft and broken open, and full of something that looked almost like longing. "No, baby," he said, his eyes on Victoria. "I'm not scared. I've got somebody real nice taking care of me up here. I'm gonna be just fine. You go to sleep now, okay? And when you wake up, you start watching the driveway because Daddy's coming home." "Okay, Daddy. I love you to the moon." "And back, Lilybug. To the moon and back. Now go to—" The phone died, just like that, mid-sentence. The screen went black, and the call cut out, and the small, warm room was silent, except for the storm. For a moment, Ethan just sat there, holding the dead phone, his hand trembling. "She heard you," Victoria said softly. "She heard all of it. The important part. She knows you're coming home." "Yeah." He set the phone down, wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Yeah, she heard me." It was 1:59 a.m. "You just gave up your rescue call," he said, "for a 7-year-old's bedtime." "I gave it up because you needed it more than I did." She pulled the blanket tighter. "And because, for what it's worth, I'd rather not be rescued by a helicopter at 3 in the morning anyway. I've spent the whole night convincing myself I could survive being human for a few hours. I'd like to finish the experiment." Ethan let out a long breath, half a laugh, and he lay back down. But this time, when he settled onto the pillow, the canyon between them was gone. They were close now, closer than they'd started, closer than either of them would have admitted to wanting 12 hours ago. "That was the bravest thing I've seen anyone do in a long time," he said. "It was a phone call. It was you putting somebody else first when you didn't have to. For somebody who spent 30 years looking out for number 1 Victoria, that's about the bravest thing there is." She didn't answer. But in the dark, he felt her hand find his under the blanket just for a second, just a brush of cold fingers against his. And then it was gone, like she couldn't quite believe she'd done it. It was 2:03 a.m. They lay there in the warm dark, the storm howling outside, and for a while, neither of them said anything. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not the gridlocked, hostile silence of the doorway. Not even the careful, tense silence of 2 strangers sharing a bed. It was the silence of 2 people who'd seen each other's worst fears and decided not to look away. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "And you can tell me to shut up." "You're going to ask anyway." "Probably." "Then ask. When's the last time somebody took care of you? Not your staff, not somebody you paid. Somebody who just wanted to make sure you were okay because they cared whether you were okay." The question landed in the dark, and Ethan felt Victoria go very still beside him. It was 2:08 a.m. For a long time she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, younger, like she was reaching back across a long distance. "My mother," she said. "When I was 9. I had pneumonia. The bad kind, the kind that puts you in the hospital. And she sat by my bed for 6 days straight. Didn't leave once. Read to me when I couldn't sleep. Held my hand through the worst of it." A pause. "She died 2 years later. Cancer. Fast. And after that it was just my father, and my father didn't believe in taking care of people. He believed in toughening them up. So that's what he did to me. toughened me up until there was nothing soft left to touch. She let out a breath. So the answer to your question, Ethan, is that the last time someone took care of me because they cared, I was 9 years old, and it's been 35 years, and I'd honestly stopped believing it was a real thing people did. I thought it was a story we told children. Ethan's chest ached. It's real, he said quietly. It's the realest thing there is. I do it every single day for a little girl who can't even tie her own shoes yet. It's the whole point, Victoria. It's the only thing that's the point. I know that now, she said. I've known it since about midnight when a stranger told me I wasn't a fool for being scared. That was the first time in 35 years anyone took care of me. You did that, tonight. Her voice caught. I don't even know how to thank you for it. I don't have I never learned the words. You don't need words. He turned his head toward her in the dark. You gave up a rescue helicopter for my kid's bedtime. That's the thank you. That's the whole thank you. I heard it loud and clear. It was 2:14 a.m. And then something shifted in the room. The baseboard heater, which had been ticking faithfully all night, fell silent. Ethan noticed it the way you notice a clock stop, the absence of a sound you'd stopped hearing. He sat up. What is it? Victoria asked. The heater. The baseboard. It just cut out. He swung his legs out of the bed and crossed to the wall unit, pressing his hand against it. Cold. Already going cold. The circuit's gone. The cold finally got the last working heat source in the house. The temperature in the room, which had held steady all night, began almost immediately to drop. It was 2:17 a.m. How long? Victoria said. She didn't bother dressing it up anymore. She trusted him now. How long until it's dangerous? The room'll hold for a while. Good insulation, thick curtains, 2 people putting off heat. He came back to the bed. But the worst of the cold's coming between 3 and 5, you said it yourself. And now we've got no heater fighting it. Just us. Just the blankets and us. He sat on the edge of the bed. I'm not going to lie to you, Victoria. The next 3 hours are going to be the hard part. This is the stretch where people make mistakes, where they get cold enough that their judgment goes and they do something stupid. Then tell me what to do, she said. You're the expert. Tell me and I'll do it. I trust you. 3 words. I trust you. From Victoria Hale, who trusted no one, who'd built an empire on trusting no one. Ethan felt the weight of them. Okay, he said. Then here's what we do. We get under all the blankets, every single one, and we stop pretending there's a canyon in this bed, because there isn't. Not anymore. Not if we want to make it to morning warm. We share heat. Skin's warmer than clothes when you're trapped against another person under blankets. But I'm not going to ask you to do anything you're not okay with. So we keep our clothes on, and we get close, and we stay close, and we make it to sunrise, together. You okay with that? It was 2:21 a.m. In the dark, he heard Victoria let out a breath. 12 hours ago, she said. If you'd told me I'd end this day asking a maintenance man to hold me through a snowstorm so I didn't freeze to death, I'd have had you escorted out of the building. And now, she said, and he heard the smile in her voice, even though he couldn't see it. I'm asking you to hold me through a snowstorm so I don't freeze to death. Funny how a day changes things. Come here, Ethan said. And she did. This time there was no stiffness, no careful tension, no woman holding herself rigid against the possibility of bolting. This time, Victoria Hale moved into the warmth of him like she'd been doing it her whole life. She curled against his chest, and Ethan wrapped both arms around her over the blankets and pulled every layer of wool and down up around them both until they were a single warm thing in a cooling room. She was shivering again. He could feel it. I've got you, he said into her hair. You're not going to freeze. Not on my watch. I fix things, remember. Keeping people warm and alive. That's just about the only thing I'm actually good at. You're good at more than that, she murmured. You're good at making a frightened woman feel safe. Not many men can do that. Most of them don't even try. It was 2:34 a.m. Slowly, The shivering eased. Slowly, the warmth built between them, two bodies pooling their heat against the creeping cold. And as the worst hours of the night came on, Ethan Cole and Victoria Hale held each other in the dark, and they talked. They talked about everything. They talked the way people only talk at 2 and 3 in the morning when the rest of the world is asleep and the storm has cut them off from everything, and there's nothing left to do but be honest. She told him about the loneliness at the top, the way everyone wanted something from her, the way she'd forgotten how to tell the difference between people who liked her and people who liked her power. He told her about the exhaustion of single fatherhood, the nights he sat on the bathroom floor after Lily was asleep, just to have somewhere to fall apart where she couldn't see. She told him she was 44 and hadn't been in love since she was 26. He told her he wasn't sure he'd ever really been in love at all, that what he'd had with Sarah felt more like a habit they'd both outgrown. She told him she was afraid she'd left it too late, that she'd spent so long building walls that she'd forgotten how to take them down, that she'd die in a glass house on a mountain with no one to notice for a week. He told her that wasn't going to happen. "You don't know that," she said. "I know that you gave up a rescue call for a kid you've never met," he said. "I know that you held a flashlight for a stranger in your father's coat. I know that you're letting a maintenance man hold you right now, even though every instinct you've got is screaming at you to put the walls back up. That's not a woman who's forgotten how to take the walls down, Victoria. That's a woman who's taking them down right now. Tonight. I'm watching you do it." It was 2:51 a.m. She was quiet for a long time. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "When you pounded on my door, I looked at you and I saw a problem, a liability, someone to be managed and gotten rid of as quickly as possible." Her hand pressed flat against his chest over his heart. "And now I can't imagine getting rid of you. Isn't that strange? 12 hours? It took 12 hours to undo 35 years. "It wasn't 12 hours. Ethan said. "It was the storm. The storm it strips everything away. All the stuff that doesn't matter. The titles and the money and the walls. And what's left is just two people in the dark trying to keep each other alive." He tightened his arms around her. "That's all any of it ever really is underneath. We just spend most of our lives pretending it's something more complicated, so we don't have to feel how simple and scary it actually is." It was 3 a.m. The deepest cold of the night settled over the house. Outside, the storm reached its peak, the wind screaming down off the ridge like something alive. But in the small dark room under a mountain of blankets, two people who had started the day as strangers held each other and stayed warm, and the cold could not get to them because they would not let it get to each other. And somewhere in that deepest, coldest hour, Victoria Hale fell asleep. Ethan felt it happen. Felt her breathing slow and deepen, felt the last bit of tension finally leave her body, felt her go soft and heavy and trusting against his chest. And he lay there awake, keeping watch over the most powerful woman in 3 states as she slept in his arms like a child. And he thought about how strange and enormous life was, that it could take a broken truck and a dead engine and a snowstorm and bring him here to this. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Someone had to stay awake and feed the fire of their shared warmth. Someone had to make sure she was okay, and Ethan Cole had spent 3 years being the someone who stayed awake. It was the most natural thing in the world to do it for her too. At 3:24 a.m., she shifted in her sleep and murmured something he couldn't make out, and her hand curled into the fabric of his shirt, holding on. At 3:41 a.m., the wind eased just slightly the first crack in the storm's fury, though Ethan was too focused on the woman in his arms to notice. At 3:58 a.m., Victoria woke up. She didn't startle this time. She just surfaced slowly, and for a moment she lay still against his chest, and Ethan knew she was awake, but neither of them said anything. They just stayed there, wrapped together in the warm dark, two people who had nowhere else in the world to be. "You stayed awake," she finally said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. The whole time. Somebody had to keep watch. You watched over me." "Course I did. Course." She was quiet. And then in a voice he'd never heard from her, a voice with no armor in it at all, she said, "No one has ever watched over me while I slept. Not since my mother. Not once in 35 years. Her voice broke on the last word. And a man I met yesterday afternoon did it without my even asking, without wanting anything for it. It was 4 a.m., and in the dark, Ethan felt something change, felt the air in the room change. Victoria lifted her head from his chest, and even though he couldn't really see her face, he could feel her looking at him closer than they'd been all night. "Ethan," she whispered. "Yeah. I'm not asking because I'm cold." And she closed the last bit of distance between them. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't even really about wanting, not the way the word usually meant. It was two lonely people who'd spent a whole night taking down walls, finally reaching across the last inch of space between them. Her lips found his in the dark, soft and questioning, and Ethan, who had given his word, Ethan, who had promised to be a gentleman, felt every reason to pull away, dissolve, because this wasn't him taking advantage of a frightened woman in a storm. This was her choosing him, choosing to feel something after 35 years of feeling nothing. He kissed her back. Gently. Carefully. The way you hold something that's been broken for a long time, and is finally cautiously letting itself be held. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria pressed her forehead against his, and let out a long, shaking breath. "I shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Do you wish you hadn't?" A pause. "No," she said. "God help me. No, I don't." It was 4:09 a.m. Then don't apologize for it. Ethan brushed her hair back from her face. "Not everything good in this world is a mistake, Victoria. Sometimes a thing is just good. Sometimes two people in a storm find something real, and the only mistake would be pretending they didn't." She settled back against his chest, and this time she fit there like she'd been made for it. "In the morning," she said quietly, "the storm's going to end. And the helicopters are going to come, or the snowcats or whatever they send. And I'm going to have to be Victoria Hale again. The CEO, the glacier. The woman with no soft place left to touch." Her hand tightened on his shirt. "And you're going to have to be a maintenance contractor who got stranded at the boss's house. And there's going to be this enormous impossible distance between us again. The kind of distance that has lawyers and HR departments and headlines." "I know," Ethan said. "I don't want it," she said. "The distance. I've had distance my whole life. I'm so tired of distance, Ethan." It was 4:17 a.m. He held her tighter, and he didn't have an answer because she was right. He knew she was right. Out there beyond the storm, the world was full of reasons this couldn't be anything. He was a maintenance man with a 7-year-old and an empty bank account. She was a billionaire who owned the company that signed his checks. Every rule, every line, every cold, hard fact of the world they were about to return to said that the night they'd shared had to stay exactly that, a night. A storm. A thing that never happened. "We've still got a few hours," he said finally. "Before the storm breaks. Before the world comes back. Let's not give them away worrying about it. Let's just be here, while we still can." And so they did. They lay there in the warm dark, as the deepest cold of the night slowly began to lift two people holding on to something they both knew they might not be allowed to keep. They didn't talk about the morning anymore. They talked about small things, foolish things, the things people say when they're trying to memorize each other. Her favorite song, the first car he ever owned, the place she'd always wanted to travel and never had time, the way Lily laughed. At 4:38 a.m., Victoria laughed. Really laughed, a real laugh. Surprised and bright at something Ethan said about a raccoon that had once gotten into a resort's ductwork, and the sound of it in the dark was so unexpected and so beautiful that Ethan thought he'd never heard anything like it. "You should do that more," he said. "Do what?" "Laugh. Really laugh. You've got a good one. You've been hiding it." "I haven't had much to laugh about." "Well?" He kissed the top of her head. "Maybe that's changing." It was 4:51 a.m. And then faintly through the thick curtains and the stone walls, something changed in the quality of the darkness. Not light, not yet. but the first loosening of the night's grip. The storm, which had raged without pause for almost 12 hours, was finally beginning to break. Victoria felt it too. She lifted her head. "It's stopping," she said quietly. "The wind. Listen. It's stopping." Ethan listened. She was right. The howl that had been the constant background of the whole long night was fading, settling into something almost gentle. The storm was ending, and with it they both knew the night they'd shared was ending too. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat up slightly, and in the first faint gray hint of the coming dawn, Ethan could just barely make out her face, and the expression on it stopped his heart. Because it wasn't the CEO, it wasn't the glacier, it was just a woman looking at a man completely without armor, completely afraid. "Ethan," she said, "before the world comes back. Before I have to put the walls up again and you have to pretend this never happened. I need to tell you something and I need you to hear it, because I might never have the courage to say it once the sun's all the way up." It was 4:58 a.m. Ethan reached up and took her hand. "I'm listening," he said, and Victoria Hale took a breath to say the thing she'd never said to anyone in her entire adult life. "I'm falling for you," Victoria said. The words came out of her in a rush, like water through a broken dam, like something that had been held back so long it didn't know how to come out gently. "I don't know how it's possible. I've known you for 12 hours. 12 hours, Ethan. People don't fall for someone in 12 hours. It's not rational. It's not how I do anything. I plan, I calculate, I weigh costs and benefits for months before I commit to a vendor. And here I am at 5 in the morning telling a man I met yesterday that I think I'm falling for him, and I can't make it stop, and I don't even want to make it stop, which is the most frightening part of all." It was 5:02 a.m. Ethan held her hand and didn't say anything for a moment because his heart was pounding so hard he wasn't sure his voice would work. "Victoria, don't." She pulled back slightly. "Don't say something kind to make me feel better. Don't tell me it's the storm, or that I'm just lonely, or that I'll feel differently when the sun comes up. I know all of that. I've already told it to myself 100 times tonight. I'm a grown woman. I know the difference between a feeling and a fact." Her voice shook. "But I also know that I have not felt this awake, this seen this much like a person in 35 years. And I'm not going to let the sun come up and pretend I didn't feel it. I've spent my whole life pretending. I'm done." "I wasn't going to say any of that," Ethan said quietly. She went still. "You weren't?" "No." He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I was going to say that I'm falling for you too, and it's scaring the hell out of me because I've got more reasons than you do for why it can't work, and not one of them is making me want it any less." It was 5:06 a.m. For a moment, Victoria just stared at him in the gray half-light. "You mean that?" she said. "You're not just saying it back." "Victoria, I haven't looked at another woman as anything but a stranger in 3 years. I shut that part of myself off the morning Sarah left because it was the only way to survive. I had a kid to raise. I didn't have room for my own heart, so I locked it in a box and threw away the key." He swallowed hard. "And then I pounded on your door last night because I was gonna freeze, and you opened it, and you looked at me like I was nothing, and somehow over the next 12 hours that box got pried open, and I didn't even notice until it was too late. So no, I'm not just saying it back. I wish I were. It'd be a hell of a lot simpler if I were." Victoria let out a breath that was half a laugh and half a sob, and she pressed her forehead against his. "We're idiots," she whispered. "Total idiots," he agreed. "This is insane." "Certifiable. There are 1,000 reasons this can't work." "At least 1,000, Ethan said. "I counted some of them around 3 a.m. while you were sleeping. Your money, my truck that doesn't even run, your company that signs my checks. The fact that if anybody found out they'd say you took advantage of an employee, or I took advantage of a vulnerable woman in a storm, and either way it'd be ugly and it'd be in the papers and it'd hurt you more than it'd hurt me." He paused. "I thought about all of it, every reason. And then you woke up and looked at me and I forgot every single one. It was 5:11 a.m. The storm outside had quieted to almost nothing. Now just a soft wind, the occasional gust, the long, exhausted sigh of a blizzard that had finally spent itself. And in the small, warm room in the first gray light of a morning that was coming whether they wanted it to or not, two people held on to each other and the impossible thing between them. "So what do we do?" Victoria said. "When the sun comes up, when they come for us. What do we actually do, Ethan? Because I'm telling you right now that I cannot go back to being the glacier after tonight. I can't unfeel this. I won't." "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been trying to figure it out all night, and the honest answer is, I don't know. There's no clean way to do this. There's no version where we walk out of this house and it's simple." "Then let's not make it simple," she said. "Let's just make it real, whatever it costs." And that was when they heard it. A sound faint and far away cutting through the dying storm. A low rhythmic thudding growing slowly louder. A sound that didn't belong to the mountain or the wind. Ethan sat up. "Is that a helicopter?" Victoria said, and her whole body went rigid. "That's a helicopter." It was 5:19 a.m. "They're early," Ethan said. "You said they wouldn't come until you missed a meeting. It's barely dawn on a what day is it even?" "Sunday." Victoria was already moving, throwing back the blankets, the cold rushing in. "It's Sunday. There's no meeting until Monday. They shouldn't be—" She stopped. Her face changed. "Unless someone reported me missing. Unless someone was already worried." "Who'd be worried? You said nobody knew you were up here." "My assistant knows." Victoria stood wrapping a blanket around herself, her mind visibly racing. "Diane, she's the only one. She knows I come up here every year, and she knows the storm hit, and oh God, she would have been watching the news. She would have seen the roads close. She would have called the property and gotten no answer because the lines are down, and she would have—" Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth. "She would have called search and rescue. Diane would have moved heaven and earth. She's the only person on this earth who would have." It was 5:23 a.m. The thudding grew louder, closer, and something in Ethan's chest, something warm and fragile that had been growing all night long, began to tighten with dread. Because the helicopter wasn't just rescue. The helicopter was the world coming back. The helicopter was Monday, and HR departments, and the impossible distance between a CEO and a maintenance man. The helicopter was the end of the only night in his entire adult life that he hadn't felt completely crushingly alone. "Victoria." He got up, crossed to her, took her by the shoulders. "Listen to me. Before they get here, before that thing lands and the world comes flooding back in, I need you to hear me say it once clearly, when it's not the dark and it's not the storm making us crazy. So you can't tell yourself later that I didn't mean it." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "I want this," he said. "Not the night, not the storm. You, the real you, the one who held a flashlight in her father's coat and gave up a rescue call for my kid and laughed at a raccoon story at 4 a.m. I want that woman in my life and Lily's life for real in the daylight, with all the complications and the lawyers and the headlines and the truck that doesn't run. I want all of it. And I know it's crazy and I know it's fast and I don't care. When that helicopter lands, you're gonna feel the walls trying to come back up. And I need you to remember that a man stood in front of you at dawn and told you the truth." Okay, it was 5:27 a.m. Tears were running down Victoria's face now openly, the woman who never cried. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll remember. Promise me." "I promise." The helicopter was right overhead now, the thudding enormous, the windows rattling in their frames. A searchlight swept across the curtains, blinding even through the thick fabric. And then the sound changed, settling, descending. They were landing somewhere out front, in the wide, flat clearing where Victoria's helipad sat buried under a foot of fresh snow. "They're here," Victoria said. "They're here," Ethan echoed. And just like that, the spell broke. What happened next happened fast. Victoria moved through the house like a different person, and Ethan watched it happen with a kind of helpless ache. watched the armor reassemble itself, piece by piece. Watched her spine straighten, and her face cool, and her voice drop into that flat, controlled register he remembered from the elevator. By the time she'd pulled on real clothes and crossed to the front door, Victoria Hale, the woman, had been packed carefully away, and Victoria Hale, the CEO, had taken the wheel. It was 5:34 a.m. She pulled open the front door, and the cold, and the noise, and the world came roaring in. There were three of them, a search and rescue team in heavy gear headlamps cutting through the gray dawn, faces tight with the focused urgency of people who'd flown a helicopter through the tail end of a blizzard. The lead one, a broad-shouldered woman with a no-nonsense face, stepped forward. "Ms. Hale, Victoria Hale." "Yes." Victoria's voice was perfectly level. "I'm Victoria Hale." "Ma'am, thank God. Your assistant's been calling us every hour since midnight. We couldn't get a bird up until the storm broke." The woman's eyes swept past Victoria into the house and landed on Ethan, standing in the hallway in his rumpled clothes. Is there someone with you?" And there it was. The first test. The first moment where the world demanded an answer. It was 5:37 a.m. Ethan watched Victoria's face, and his heart was in his throat, because this was it. This was the moment she'd warned him about, the moment the walls came up, and he had no idea at all what she was going to say. "This is Ethan Cole," Victoria said. "He's a maintenance contractor for the company. His vehicle broke down on the access road last night. He sought shelter here during the storm." A pause. Perfectly professional, perfectly cold. "He kept the generator running for several hours, which is very likely the reason I didn't suffer hypothermia. I'd like it noted that he conducted himself with complete professionalism throughout." Ethan felt something in his chest crack clean in half. It was true. Every word of it was technically true. And every word of it was a wall. A careful surgical wall designed to make the night they'd shared into nothing, into a contractor and a CEO and a generator and a professional incident to be noted in a report. The rescue leader nodded, already turning. "Understood. We'll get statements from both of you once we're down the mountain. Right now we need to move. There's another storm cell behind this one, and we've got maybe 90 minutes of clear flying. Grab whatever you absolutely need. We're wheels up in 10. She turned and headed back toward the helicopter, and the other two followed, and for one moment, Ethan and Victoria were alone again in the open doorway, the cold pouring in around them. "Victoria," Ethan said quietly. She didn't look at him. "Don't." "You promised." "I know what I promised." Her voice was barely a whisper, and underneath the ice he could hear it shaking. "And I meant it. But not like this, Ethan. Not in front of a rescue team at dawn. Not as a headline waiting to happen. If I'd told that woman the truth, do you understand what would happen? By Monday, it would be everywhere. CEO's storm tryst with married." She stopped. "You're not married, but they wouldn't check first. They'd print it and check later. They'd destroy you. They'd say I preyed on an employee. They'd take Lily into it, Ethan. They'd put a picture of your daughter in a tabloid. I won't do that. I won't let what we have become that. Do you understand me? The wall wasn't me rejecting you. The wall was me protecting you." It was 5:42 a.m., and just like that, the crack in Ethan's chest began slowly to heal. "You could have told me that," he said, "instead of just freezing me out. I'm telling you now, we have about 30 seconds before they look back, so listen carefully." She finally turned and looked at him, and her eyes were burning. "When we get down that mountain, I am going to be cold to you. In public, I am going to be exactly what they expect me to be. The CEO and the contractor. I'm going to file the report and note your professionalism and shake your hand and let you walk away, and it's going to look like nothing happened, because that is the only way to protect you and Lily, and whatever this is, from being torn apart before it even has a chance to be anything." She gripped his arm hard. "But it is not nothing. Do you hear me? 6 days. Give me 6 days to handle this the right way, quietly, carefully. And on the 7th day, I will come find you in the daylight, with no storm and no helicopter and no one watching, and I will say all of this again. And then we'll figure out the rest. Together. Can you give me 6 days?" It was 5:44 a.m. Ethan looked at her, really looked the way he'd looked at her across the firelight a lifetime ago, and he saw that she was telling the truth. He saw that the coldness wasn't the wall coming back up. It was a shield she was holding in front of both of them. 6 days, he said. And then you come find me. I promise. You'd better. Because I've got a daughter who's going to ask me about the nice lady who took care of me on the mountain, and I'm a terrible liar, Victoria. She'll know there's more to it in about 4 seconds. For just a moment, just one, the CEO cracked, and Victoria Hale smiled a real smile, warm and frightened, and full of something neither of them had a word for yet. Tell her, Victoria said softly, that the nice lady is going to come read her the Triceratops part herself, if she'll have me. And Ethan's heart, which had cracked in half 30 seconds ago, put itself back together so fast it almost hurt. She'll have you, he said. God help us both. She'll have you. Ms. Hale. The rescue leader called from the helicopter. We need to move. It was 5:46 a.m., and the world came roaring back. They went. Victoria grabbed a single bag, the satellite phone, some documents from a safe, nothing else from the enormous, empty house she'd built. Ethan grabbed his still damp jacket and his dead phone, and the memory of a night he'd never tell anyone about. They walked out into the gray dawn together, and apart a CEO and a contractor, exactly what the world expected to see, and they climbed into the helicopter, and the rescue team strapped them in on opposite sides of the cabin, and the rotors roared, and they lifted up off the mountain that had held them prisoner all night long. Ethan looked out the window as they rose. He could see the whole thing from up here, the buried road, his dead truck. A tiny dark shape in the white, the glass house glowing in the first light. The place where everything had changed. And then the helicopter banked, and it all slid out of view. And there was just the white mountains rolling away beneath them, and the woman across the cabin who wouldn't meet his eyes because they were both being watched. But once, just once, as the helicopter leveled out and the rescue team was busy with their radios, Victoria Hale looked across the cabin at Ethan Cole. And she didn't smile, and she didn't speak, and her face stayed perfectly cool and professional. But she lifted her hand just slightly off her knee, and she held up 6 fingers. 6 days. And Ethan, who fixed broken things for a living, who hadn't let himself hope for anything in 3 years, nodded once and held up 6 fingers back. It was 5:58 a.m. The flight down took 20 minutes. 20 minutes that Ethan spent watching the world get bigger and closer, the towns appearing, the roads, the ordinary Sunday morning life of a world that had no idea what had happened on the mountain. They sat down in a parking lot at the base where an ambulance waited, and a small crowd of emergency workers, and off to one side, a tall, sharp-faced woman in a long coat, who Ethan understood immediately had to be Diane. The assistant ran to the helicopter the moment the rotors slowed, and Ethan watched her reach Victoria. Watched something happen on Diane's face that was pure naked relief. Watched her almost embrace her boss before catching herself and settling for gripping Victoria's hands in both of hers. "You're alive," Diane was saying loud enough that Ethan could hear it over the dying rotors. "Oh my God, you're alive. I've aged 10 years. I've been on the phone all night. I called everyone. I called the governor's office, Victoria. I called the National Guard." "I'm fine, Diane." Victoria's voice was steady, but Ethan saw her squeeze the woman's hands back. "I'm fine. You did everything right. Thank you." It was 6:21 a.m., and then Diane's eyes found Ethan climbing down out of the helicopter, and they narrowed with the instant suspicion of a woman whose entire job was to protect Victoria Hale from threats. "And who is this?" "A contractor," Victoria said smoothly, not missing a beat. "His truck broke down on the access road. He sheltered at the property during the storm. He was very helpful with the generator." She was already turning away, already moving toward the SUV that had pulled up, already being Victoria Hale. "See that he gets a ride home, would you? And a check for his trouble. Whatever the maintenance contract rate is, double it. He kept me from freezing." And that was it. That was all she gave him in front of the world, a smooth dismissal, a double-rate check, a ride home. The CEO disposing of a contractor. Ethan stood in the cold parking lot and watched Victoria Hale walk away from him toward a waiting SUV, her assistant at her side, her armor flawless, not a single backward glance. It would have broken him. It should have broken him. But Ethan Cole had spent the whole night learning to read the woman behind the wall, and so he knew that the not looking back was the hardest thing she'd ever done. He knew that every step away from him was costing her something. He knew because just before she got into the SUV, just before the door closed, Victoria Hale paused for half a second, and without turning around, without anyone else in that whole busy parking lot noticing, she lifted her hand to the side of her face and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, with 6 fingers. It was 6:29 a.m. Then the door closed, and the SUV pulled away, and she was gone. "Hey." A young EMT appeared at Ethan's elbow. "You Cole, Ms. Hale's office already called down, said to get you a ride wherever you need to go. Where you headed, man?" Ethan watched the SUV disappear down the road toward the highway, toward the city, toward a world where Victoria Hale was a billionaire and he was a guy who fixed furnaces. "Home," he said. "I've got a kid waiting for me. I've got a Triceratops to read about." The EMT grinned. "Long night, huh?" Ethan thought about it. The dead engine, the pounding on the door, the flashlight in the utility room, and the propane gauge in the storm, and the phone charging off a truck battery. Lily's voice on the line. To the moon and back. Victoria's mother and the pneumonia, and 35 years of nobody watching over her while she slept. The kiss at 4 a.m. The 6 fingers held up across a helicopter cabin. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "Longest night of my life." It was 6:34 a.m. The ride home took 2 hours. Ethan watched the mountains shrink in the rearview mirror and tried to make sense of what had happened to him, and couldn't, because some things are too big to make sense of while they're still happening. He just knew that he'd gone up that mountain one man and was coming down a different one. He knew that a door he'd nailed shut 3 years ago had been pried open in a single night, and there was no nailing it back. He got home a little after 9. And before the car had even fully stopped in his driveway, the front door of his small house flew open, and a 7-year-old in dinosaur pajamas came tearing down the front walk, in her bare feet through the snow, screaming, "Daddy! Daddy!" at the top of her lungs. Ethan caught her in his arms and lifted her up, and held her so tight she squeaked, and he buried his face in her hair, and for a moment he couldn't speak at all. "Daddy, you came home. You said you would, and you did." "I did, baby. I told you I would. Did you watch the driveway?" "I watched it all morning. Marcy made me wear shoes, but then I took them off." She pulled back and looked at him with enormous, serious eyes. "Daddy, were you really safe? Were you really, really safe?" It was 9:14 a.m., and Ethan Cole, holding his daughter in the snow, thought about the woman on the mountain, the woman with 6 days and 6 fingers, the woman who'd given up a rescue helicopter so this exact little girl could hear her daddy's voice at 2 in the morning. "Yeah, Lilybug," he said, his voice thick. "I was really, really safe. The nicest lady in the whole world took care of me." "What lady?" Ethan smiled, and his eyes were wet, and somewhere up on a mountain, a clock was counting down 6 days. "I'll tell you all about her," he said, carrying his daughter inside out of the cold. "But first I owe you a Triceratops. 2 pinkies, remember I'm a man of my word." And he carried her inside, and he shut the door against the cold, and somewhere across the city in the back of a black SUV, Victoria Hale closed her eyes and pressed 6 fingers against her own heart and began very quietly to count. The first day was the hardest. Ethan Cole had counted a lot of things in his life: overtime hours, dollars, in a thin checking account, the number of bedtime stories, until Lily finally fell asleep. But he'd never counted anything the way he counted those 6 days. He woke up Monday morning, and the number in his head was 5, and it sat there behind everything he did, a quiet drumbeat under the ordinary noise of his life. It was Monday, 7:15 a.m., and he was making Lily's breakfast when his phone buzzed. His heart stopped. He lunged for it, certain it was her, certain she'd broken her own rule on day 1. It was the maintenance dispatcher, a water heater out in a rental property across town. Could he take it? "Yeah," Ethan said, and he heard the flatness in his own voice. "Yeah, I'll take it. He took every job they threw at him that week because the work was the only thing that made the counting stop. He fixed water heaters and furnaces and a frozen pipe that had burst in somebody's crawl space. And he was good at it, the way he was always good at it. And the whole time, some part of him was up on a mountain in a small, warm room holding a woman who'd held up 6 fingers across a helicopter cabin. He didn't tell anyone. Who would he even tell? There was no one in Ethan's life he could call up and say, "I think I fell in love with Victoria Hale during a snowstorm, and she's going to come find me on Sunday." They'd think he'd lost his mind. Half the time alone in his truck between jobs, he thought he'd lost his mind too. Wednesday, day 3. The doubt came for him hard. It was 11:40 p.m. and Lily was asleep, and Ethan was sitting on the bathroom floor. The same bathroom floor where he'd fallen apart so many nights over the last 3 years, and the thought that had been circling all day finally landed. She's not coming. It made too much sense. She was Victoria Hale. She was a billionaire who ran an empire, who had lawyers and a public image, and 100 reasons to wake up one morning and decide that a night in a storm was just a night in a storm. People said things in storms they'd never say in daylight. She'd told him that herself, the first night sitting by the fire. Maybe she'd meant it as a warning. Maybe she'd already been protecting herself from this exact moment when the daylight came and the feeling evaporated like it had never been real. He was a maintenance contractor with a busted truck and a 7-year-old and $41 in his checking account until Friday. She was a woman who owned mountains. Of course she wasn't coming. The smartest thing she'd done all night was hand him a story to tell the contractor, the generator, the professional incident. And the smartest thing he could do now was believe it. Ethan sat on the bathroom floor at midnight and made himself stop counting. "She's not coming," he told himself. "Let it go. You had one good night. That's more than you've had in 3 years. Be grateful and let it go." It was 12:04 a.m. when his phone buzzed. He almost didn't look. He was so sure it was dispatch again, another frozen pipe, another middle-of-the-night emergency. But he looked. And it was a number he didn't recognize. And the message was 4 words. 3 more days. Ethan stared at it for a long time. And then, sitting on the cold bathroom floor in the middle of the night, a 35-year-old man who fixed broken things for a living put his hand over his mouth and laughed, and it came out shaky and wet because she was counting too. She was counting too. He typed back, "I almost talked myself out of believing you." The reply came fast, like she'd been holding the phone. "Don't. I'm handling things. It's complicated and I can't explain by text. But I'm counting. Same as you. 3 days. 3 days, he typed back. And then, because he couldn't help himself, Lily wants to know if the nice lady likes dinosaurs. A long pause, long enough that he worried he'd pushed too far, made it too real, scared her off. Then, tell her the nice lady's favorite is the Triceratops, the one that got separated from the herd. I've been thinking about him all week. And Ethan understood that she'd been listening that night on the mountain when he talked about the book. That she'd held the small details of his small life and carried them down the mountain and kept them. "Good night, Victoria," he typed. "Good night, Ethan." He didn't sit on the bathroom floor anymore that week. It was 12:19 a.m. when he turned off the light and went to bed, and for the first time in 3 years, he fell asleep easy. What Ethan didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was what those 6 days looked like on the other side. Because while he was fixing water heaters and counting and trying not to hope Victoria Hale was fighting a war. It started Monday morning in her office with Diane. "There's talk," Diane said, setting a coffee on Victoria's desk. Diane had been with Victoria for 11 years, and Diane noticed everything, which was both the best and the most dangerous thing about her. The rescue team filed their report. Standard stuff. But the pilot mentioned to someone who mentioned to someone that you came down off that mountain with a man. And you know how this company is. By lunchtime it'll be a rumor, by Wednesday it'll be a story. It was Monday, 9:02 a.m. Victoria didn't look up from her screen. "There was a contractor stranded at the property. He kept the generator running. It's in my statement." "It's in your statement," Diane agreed. I read your statement. I've also worked for you for 11 years. Victoria and I know what your voice sounds like when you're telling the truth. And when you're telling the truth in a way that's designed to stop people asking questions." She paused. "So I'm going to ask you one question, and then I'm going to drop it forever if you want me to. Are you okay?" And Victoria Hale, who had spent 35 years answering that question with fine before anyone even finished asking it, looked up at the one person on earth who'd just sat up all night calling the National Guard to save her life. It was 9:04 a.m. "No," Victoria said quietly. "I'm not okay, Diane. Something happened up there, something I don't have words for, and I'm terrified of, and I can't stop thinking about. And I need your help. And I need you to not say a single word to anyone ever, because if this gets out the wrong way, it will destroy a good man and his little girl, and I will not let that happen." Diane sat down slowly across from Victoria's desk. "Tell me," she said. So Victoria told her, not all of it, not the 4 a.m. part, not the things said in the dark, but enough. The storm, the stranded contractor, the generator, the satellite phone. The daughter on the line at 2 in the morning, the man who stayed awake all night to make sure she didn't freeze. The man who hadn't wanted a single thing from her except to keep her alive. When she finished, Diane was quiet for a long moment. 11 years, Diane said finally. 11 years, I've watched you turn down every man who ever got close. The senators, the CEOs. That actor, what was his name, the one with the yacht? You sent them all away like they were quarterly reports that didn't meet projections. She shook her head slowly. And now you're sitting here telling me about a maintenance contractor with a broken truck, like he's the most important thing that's ever happened to you. Do you know how I know it's real? It was 9:11 a.m. How? Because you're scared, Diane said. I've never once seen you scared. Not of board takeovers, not of lawsuits, not of anything. And you're sitting there shaking over a furnace repairman. That's how I know. She stood and she squared her shoulders, and she became the woman who'd called the governor's office at midnight. Okay, tell me what you need. We're going to do this right. And they did. That week, while Ethan fixed water heaters and counted Victoria Hale dismantled every landmine in the field before he ever had to walk across it. She got ahead of the rumor by making it boring, issuing a brief dry internal note, thanking the maintenance staff for their service during the storm, naming 3 contractors, including Ethan, burying him in a list so that singling him out later would look like nothing. She had her legal team quietly review the company's policies on relationships, not because she planned to hide one, but because she planned to survive one out in the open eventually on her own terms. She moved Ethan's contracting work off the books that connected to her personally, so that no one could ever say she'd given him special treatment, so that whatever came next couldn't be twisted into a story about a powerful woman and an employee she controlled. It was meticulous. It was strategic. It was Victoria Hale doing what Victoria Hale did better than anyone alive, except this time, for the first time in her life, she wasn't building a wall to keep someone out. She was clearing a path to let someone in. By Thursday, day 4, it was mostly done. And Thursday night, alone in her penthouse, Victoria did something she hadn't done in 35 years. It was 10:30 p.m. She sat down on the floor of her enormous, beautiful, empty apartment, the way she'd sat on the utility room floor holding a flashlight, and she let herself feel all of it. The fear, the hope, the impossible, irrational, undeniable fact that a stranger had pounded on her door in a storm and somehow walked straight through every defense she'd ever built. And she cried alone in the dark, the way she'd cried in front of Ethan at dawn, except this time there was no one to see, and somehow that made it both easier and so much harder. And then she picked herself up, and she wiped her face, and she counted. 2 days. The 5th day. Friday almost broke everything. Because on Friday, the story Victoria had spent all week diffusing finally went off, just not the way she'd feared. A reporter from a business outlet working on a profile of Victoria for an upcoming feature had gotten wind of the rescue and the contractor, and he called Diane's office Friday afternoon with questions. Pointed questions. the kind that meant he'd already half-built a story and just needed the quotes to finish it. It was Friday, 3:47 p.m. Diane brought it straight to Victoria. "He knows you came down with a man," Diane said, her voice tight. "He knows it was a contractor. He's asking whether there was, quote, anything inappropriate about a powerful executive spending a night alone with a male employee." Victoria, he's going to run something. Maybe not the truth because he doesn't have the truth, but something. And once it's out there, it's out there. We can't unring that bell. Victoria sat very still. This was the moment. She understood that completely. This was the fork in the road. She could do what she'd done her entire life. She could feed the reporter, the cold, true, boring version, the contractor and the generator, and the professional incident. She could make herself untouchable again. She could protect the empire and the image and the carefully managed life she'd built. And the story would die because there'd be nothing to feed it. And she'd be safe. And Ethan Cole would get his double-rate check and his ride home. And a memory of a night that officially never happened. Or, it was 3:51 p.m. "Diane," Victoria said slowly, "what's the reporter's name?" "Marcus Webb." "Why?" "Get him on the phone. I'll give him his quote." She stood up, and there was something different in her face, something Diane had never seen in 11 years. "I'll give him the truth." Diane went pale. "Victoria, not all of it, but enough." Victoria walked to the window of her office, looked out over the city she'd conquered, the empire she'd built brick by brick on a foundation of never letting anyone close enough to hurt her. "I've spent my whole life letting other people write the story of who I am. The glacier. The woman with no heart. The CEO who only ever wanted one thing and got it." Her voice was steady now, sure. "I'm 44 years old, Diane. I almost froze to death on a mountain last weekend. And the only reason I didn't is that a complete stranger decided my life was worth staying awake for. So no, I'm not going to let Marcus Webb write a sleazy story about a powerful woman and an employee. I'm going to tell him the real one. And the real one is going to be so much better than anything he was planning to print that he won't be able to resist it." It was 3:56 p.m. Diane stared at her boss for a long moment, and then slowly she smiled. "You know," she said, "in 11 years I don't think I've ever been more proud to work for you than I am right this second." Get him on the phone. The call lasted 20 minutes. And Victoria Hale told Marcus Webb a story, not the 4 a.m. story, not the private things. Those belonged to her and Ethan, and no one else ever. But she told him about a man who pounded on her door in a blizzard with blood on his knuckles because his daughter was waiting at home. She told him about the generator and the propane gauge and the satellite phone charging off a truck battery. She told him about a single father who gave up his one rescue call. "No," she said, "I gave it up. I told him to call his daughter instead because his little girl needed to hear his voice more than I needed a helicopter." And she let Marcus Webb understand, without ever saying it directly, that Victoria Hale had spent a night being saved by an ordinary man, and that it had changed her. When she hung up the story Marcus Webb was going to write was no longer a scandal. It was a love letter waiting to happen. It was 4:21 p.m. "He's going to soften the whole angle," Diane said, half in disbelief. "He came in here hunting a scandal and you just handed him a hero. Ethan's going to come out of this looking like a saint." "Ethan is a saint," Victoria said. "I'm just making sure the world finds out at the same time I let myself believe it." The 6th day was Saturday, and Victoria Hale spent Saturday doing something that terrified her more than any board meeting, any hostile takeover, any moment in 35 years of business. She spent Saturday getting ready to keep a promise. She didn't sleep Friday night. She lay awake in her penthouse and ran through every version of how Sunday could go. The version where she showed up at his door and the daylight had killed it after all, where he looked at her and saw only a boss, where the whole thing had been a storm-fevered dream that couldn't survive contact with an ordinary Sunday. The version where she lost her nerve at the last second and sent a car instead of going herself the coward's way, the safe way, the way she'd handled every frightening thing in her life. The version where she went, and he opened the door, and it was real, and she had absolutely no idea what to do next, because she'd never once in her life let herself want something she couldn't control. It was Saturday, 6 a.m., and Victoria Hale was wide awake, and for the first time in her adult life, she had no plan. She had only a promise. On the 7th day, I will come find you. She spent Saturday driving. Not to him, it wasn't time yet. The 7th day was Sunday, and she would not break her own promise by a single hour, but she drove out past the edge of the city to a neighborhood she'd never had any reason to visit, and she found the street, and she sat in her car across from a small house with a snow-covered yard and a beat-up sedan in the driveway that was probably the babysitter's, because Ethan's truck was still buried on a mountain. And she watched. It was 2:14 p.m. on Saturday when the front door of the small house opened and a little girl in a purple coat came running out into the yard, and a man followed her, Ethan, in jeans and a flannel shirt, laughing at something chasing his daughter through the snow. And Victoria Hale sat in her car across the street and watched a single father play with his 7-year-old in a snowy front yard. And she understood with a certainty that went all the way to the bone that she would burn her entire empire to the ground before she'd let anything hurt either one of them. She didn't get out of the car. It wasn't time. But she sat there for almost an hour watching them build a lopsided snowman, watching Ethan let Lily win a snowball fight, watching a kind of ordinary happiness she'd never had and had told herself for 35 years she didn't want. She wanted it. God help her, she wanted it more than she'd ever wanted anything. It was 3:20 p.m. when she finally drove away. And she went home and she didn't sleep again that night either, because the 7th day was finally almost here. Sunday morning came gray and cold and clear. Exactly 1 week to the hour, from the moment a rescue helicopter had set down at the base of a mountain and a CEO had walked away from a contractor with 6 fingers held against her cheek. It was Sunday 9 a.m. when Victoria Hale knocked on Ethan Cole's door. She'd dressed carefully and then changed 3 times and finally given up on careful entirely because there was no outfit in the world that said, "I'm a billionaire who fell in love with you in a snowstorm, and I've spent 6 days clearing a path so we could try this for real." In the end, she'd worn jeans, which she almost never wore, and a sweater and no armor at all. She stood on his front step with her heart going like a jackhammer, and she knocked and she waited. And the door opened. And there was Ethan Cole in a flannel shirt with a dish towel over his shoulder, and a look on his face like a man seeing the sun come up after the longest night of his life. It was 9:01 a.m. For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just stood there, a week of counting collapsing into a single instant, the storm and the helicopter, and the 6 fingers and the 4 words at midnight, all folding down into 2 people on a doorstep on an ordinary Sunday morning. "You came?" Ethan said. His voice was rough. "I told you I would." Victoria's eyes were already wet. On the 7th day, in the daylight, with no storm and no helicopter and no one watching. She let out a shaking breath. "Although I should warn you, there's going to be a fairly flattering article about you in a business magazine next week, so the no one watching part is somewhat compromised." Ethan laughed, and it cracked in the middle. "What?" "I'll explain." "There's a lot to explain. I've spent 6 days handling things, Ethan. I've spent 6 days making sure that when I stood on your doorstep, it wouldn't cost you anything, that no one could turn it into something ugly, that your daughter would never end up in a tabloid." The words were tumbling out of her, now fast unguarded, the most powerful woman in 3 states, standing on a contractor's doorstep, saying everything she'd held in for a week. "I rebuilt half my legal exposure, and I talked a reporter out of a scandal, and I told my assistant the truth, and I sat in my car across the street from your house yesterday, like a lunatic, watching you build a snowman with your daughter. And I have never in my entire life worked so hard at anything, and I'd do all of it again today right now because—" "Victoria." "Because I meant every word I said in that room, and I needed you to know that the daylight didn't change it. The daylight made it more—" "Victoria." She stopped. It was 9:04 a.m. "I almost talked myself out of believing you," Ethan said quietly. "Wednesday night. I sat on my bathroom floor at midnight, and I told myself you weren't coming, that you were too smart and too rich and too careful to throw it all away on a guy with a busted truck. I made myself stop hoping. It was the only way I could get through the week. He stepped closer. And then my phone buzzed and it said 3 more days, and I laughed so hard I cried because you were counting too. You were counting the whole time. I was counting the whole time, Victoria whispered. And then from somewhere behind Ethan inside the house, a small voice called out, "Daddy, who's at the door?" Ethan turned, and Victoria went very still, and a little girl in dinosaur pajamas appeared in the hallway, peering up at the stranger on the doorstep with enormous, curious eyes. It was 9:05 a.m. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ethan crouched down to his daughter's level and put a hand on her shoulder. "Lily," he said, and his voice was thick. "Remember the nice lady I told you about? The one who took care of me on the mountain during the storm?" Lily's eyes went wide as dinner plates. She looked from her father to Victoria and back again. "The nice lady is real," she whispered. "She's real, baby. She came to meet you." Ethan looked up at Victoria, and his eyes were full of a question and a hope and 7 years of fierce protective love. If she'd like to. And Victoria Hale, who had built an empire, who had conquered every room she'd ever walked into, who had told herself for 35 years that she didn't want children, didn't need anyone, was complete and finished and safe. Behind her walls, knelt down on a contractor's front step in jeans she almost never wore, and looked a 7-year-old girl in the eye, and felt the very last wall she'd ever built come down for good. "Hi, Lily," she said softly. "I'm Victoria. Your dad told me all about you up on the mountain. He told me about your dinosaur book." She swallowed hard. "He told me you got all the way to the part where the little Triceratops gets separated from the herd." Lily's mouth fell open. "He told you about the Triceratops?" "He did. And I have to tell you something, Lily. I've been thinking about that Triceratops all week long, about how scary it must be to get separated from everyone, to be all alone." Victoria's voice caught, and she didn't fight it. "But you know what I figured out? The Triceratops doesn't stay alone. That's not how the story ends. He finds his way back. He finds a new herd. He finds the people who are going to take care of him." She held out her hand. "Would it be okay if I read you the rest of it? Your dad said it's the best part." It was 9:07 a.m., and Lily Cole looked at the nice lady from the mountain for one long, considering moment, the way her father had looked at a stranger across a firelit room a lifetime ago. And then, she put her small hand into Victoria Hale's and said with the total certainty that only a 7-year-old possesses, "Okay, but you have to do the Triceratops voice." And just like that, Victoria laughed. The real laugh, the one Ethan had heard at 4 in the morning in a freezing room. The one he'd told her she'd been hiding her whole life. And she let a little girl in dinosaur pajamas pull her through the front door of a small warm house out of the cold inn, from the storm at last. Ethan stood and watched them go. His daughter and the woman who'd inched closer to him every hour through the longest night of his life, and something in his chest that had been broken for 3 years, finally completely healed. He stepped inside, and he shut the door against the cold. It was 9:09 a.m. on the 7th day. They didn't talk about the future that morning. There was time for the article that would run and surprise everyone, time for the careful, unhurried business of building a life across an impossible distance, time for the questions about how a billionaire CEO and a maintenance contractor were going to make a world fit around them. All of that was coming. But that morning there was just a small living room and a dinosaur book and a little girl wedged between 2 adults on a worn-out couch, and Victoria Hale doing a Triceratops voice so badly that Lily laughed until she got the hiccups, and Ethan watching the two of them with an expression he hadn't worn in years. At one point, while Lily was distracted turning the page, Victoria looked over the top of the little girl's head and met Ethan's eyes. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They'd already said all of it in the dark in a storm a week and a lifetime ago. But she lifted one hand just slightly off the page of the dinosaur book, and she held up 6 fingers. 6 days, the finger said. I counted every one. And I came. It was 9:31 a.m., and outside the small house, the last of the week's snow was melting in the gray morning light. And inside, 3 people who had each in their own way been separated from the herd had finally, against every odd and every wall and every impossible distance, found their way back to one another. Months later, when people asked Victoria Hale how it happened, how the untouchable CEO ended up with a single father and his daughter, how the glacier melted, how the woman with no heart turned out to have had one all along, she always told them the same thing. She told them about a storm. She told them about a man who pounded on her door with blood on his knuckles because his little girl was waiting. She told them about a night when the heat died and 2 strangers shared the only bed in a freezing house, and how one of them kept inching closer hour by hour, not toward a stranger, but toward the warmth she'd spent her whole life pretending she didn't need. And then she always said the same final thing, the thing that ended telling the truth she'd learned on the coldest night of her life and never once forgotten. Since the walls we build to keep the cold out are the same walls that keep us freezing alone. And sometimes it takes a stranger in a storm pounding on the door to finally let the warmth back in. Ethan Cole fixed broken things for a living. In the end, the most broken thing he ever fixed was a heart that had been frozen shut for 35 years, and it turned out to be the only repair that ever really mattered.